That's right. Hello, everyone. My name is, for anybody who doesn't know me, is Jeff Morgan. I'm the vice chairman of the authority. Our chairman is traveling today, so I will be handling the meeting responsibilities. So today is the April 28th Lehigh County Authority Board meeting. Board packets were mailed and emailed to everyone, all the board members and staff. And Lisa, not if I screw up, but when I screw up, please jump in and correct me. Yes. So we'll start with roll call.
Yes, roll call of the board. Amir Famili. Jeff Morgan.
Here.
Ted Lyons. Linda Rosenfeld.
Here.
Norma Cusick. Kevin Baker. Sean Ziller. Mark Ramis.
Here.
Peter Jen.
Here.
All right, Mr. Vice Chairman, we have 4 board members present, so that is not a quorum.
Correct. And we expect Ted Lyons to be here shortly, I believe. So review of the agenda, I think we were going to modify the agenda to accommodate the lack of a quorum at the moment.
Yes, so there's no changes to the content of the agenda, but we can rearrange the agenda to deal with the wastewater item, the Kleins Island wastewater treatment plant master plan, which is discussion only, no action. We can do that without a quorum whenever you're ready.
Public comments, okay? Any public comments?
No, thank you.
No comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny, Brian. All right, so seeing none, we can move to the item under wastewater, which is for discussion only, the Kleins Island wastewater treatment plant master plan.
All right, so for this one, we do have some guests here, and Stephen Boone, who is our asset management engineer, will lead the discussion. Of course, I'll go ahead and share screen, so we do have a presentation and some graphics to show. Stephen, take it away.
Okay, great, thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon, everybody. So this is the Kleins Island wastewater treatment plant master plan. It is a 5-year update, the 2024 update. I do have some guests with me. We'll introduce them in a second, but my name is Stephen Boone. I was the project manager for this. And so this is a informational discussion purpose type of meeting. Please feel free to ask questions along the way. I have a 15 or 20-minute presentation and then Q&A and whatever we want to talk about. So quick overview of the master plan itself, what went into it, the treatment plant, what the focus areas were, and then the capital improvement plan recommendations that are coming out of this. This is a requirement by the lease to prepare a master plan every 5 years. The previous plan was in 2015. That was performed by Kleinfelder. So 2024 marked the 5-year cycle for this update, and we consulted with Black & Veatch to help with this one. So I'll introduce the team. Big effort on both LCA side and the consultant side. From LCA, I was the PM. I took over for Amy. Amy Rohrbach was the original PM right before I started here last year. And she stayed on board to help as an assistant PM, which was great. Technical support came from AJ Capuzzi, Phil DePoe, Andrew Moore, and then everybody down at the plant was a huge part of this. Gary Saunders is the manager, Kevin Marks, the assistant manager, Joe Thompson's residuals, Brian Geisel, project manager, and Chris Mimos for SCADA. So that team had a weekly, if not daily, correspondence with us to help our consultant with information and really prepare this. And then obviously, and I'll let Black & Veatch introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stephen Gitungo, and it was a pleasure working with you, with LCA team, Amy, Stephen, AJ, and the plant team. I was a project manager from the consulting side.
Yeah, and I'm Patrick Dunlap. I'm a process engineer, so I was looking a lot of the issues with the liquid and residuals treatment capacity related to, the increasing loads, the load shift, things like that. And so anything having to do more with the process side of things, which was a large part of the master plan. I was, managing the technical areas there, and then Ed's not on the line, right? So Ed Carpenetti, the next was, on the list was, overseeing the technical aspects, on the asset management and condition assessment side of things. I think that's who's relevant to mention, right?
Thank you, guys. Yeah, and Black and Beach had a great team. Again, we were in touch with them daily. Definitely want to also recognize AECOM and Kleinfelder. A lot of their studies and ongoing projects that have been occurring over the years informed the basis for this plan and continue to help inform us going forward. So say that they definitely deserve a shout out. So as I mentioned, this is a 2024 update. So we submitted the plan to the city in draft form in December in 2024. And then since then, I've been working with them. So the city of Allentown absolutely has been a great partner, Brian, Dan, and Jenny, to really help fine tune and drive what the projects are going to be and understand what needs to be tackled. So we've been working with them since December through April to really finalize and take in their considerations as the owner of the facility. So big team, lots of work. Some of the drivers that went into this, obviously the age of the facility, some of the features and processes down there, the originals from the 20s, physical condition, regulatory standards and changes that we could be facing in the upcoming years, and just maintaining permit compliance. Population growth, obviously, future industrial loads. That's something that, is an ongoing discussion, emerging contaminants, and then clearly innovation and new technologies. There are a lot of things investigated, not everything we're going to talk about today. But and I'll get into the overview of the plant, but the bottom line is that we ensure regulatory compliance. That's what the plant's there for. We need to protect the environment, and reducing operational risks, both from an operator's perspective and public safety. So lots of research went into this, and Steve, if you want to chime in any time to talk about all the records that you reviewed, again, there's a big history with the plant and the studies that have been developed over the years, and Black and Beach had access to every one of them. So I know you had a lot of homework to do. Just a couple other highlights. LCA, we did an in-house conditions assessment. Black and Beach also did a subset conditions assessment with us, but that was a series of workshops that we do as part of our asset management and our strategic asset management planning. And we're doing it everywhere. So we did it at Klein's Island, and we were able to weave it into the master plan. Lots of workshops, lots of meetings with the consulting team to develop what the plan became. So just a quick overview of the treatment facility itself. It is a two-stage trickling filter plant with the plastic media and then the rock media. It treats 32 MGD, average daily flow, has a rated hydraulic capacity of 44.6 MGD, and it can handle up to over 80 MGD in wet weather. Not for a prolonged period of time, but instantaneous peak flow type of situations, it can get up almost near 90. And it does serve a population of approximately 270,000 people. So I won't, a lot of info on this, but just from an aerial perspective, the blue is the liquid treatment processes. The burgundy is the solids. Those are, the bulk of what the plant's doing. And I'll come back to this a little bit later, but this is just a flow diagram. So everything is in sequence. So that top series of icons, that's the liquid stream. So raw sewage comes in, it's screened, the grit's removed, and it's settled out of the primaries. That liquid stream continues to the secondary treatment, which is the plastic trickling filter. And then with some intermediate settling in between, onto the rock media for the secondary trickling filter, final clarification, disinfection, and then discharge to the river. So that liquid stream, that's all in sequence. Everything, it's step by step. That's how it flows through the plant. And then any solids that come out, and the settling processes are handled by the digesters and the filter presses where they become biosolids. So I'll come back to this a little bit later, and I just did want to mention, you know, that right now everything is in sequence in the liquid stream. Some focus areas of this plan, I mentioned the drivers. So really what, you know, we need to get the plant into a condition where it can be ready to accept increased loads, which we know are coming at some time in the near term. You know, this is not a long-term, we don't know exactly what, and we don't know exactly when, but sometime in the year 2027, we know that there is going to be a change to the use of the industrial pretreatment plant, and there will be an increase in loading daily to Klein's Island in the next, you know, 2 years or so. So a lot of the studies that have been going on and that have fed the master plan include the chemically enhanced primary treatment. That's what that CEPT stands for. Many of you saw me in September requesting approval to start that project, which will be in full-scale demonstration this year. Amy's got primary sludge lines improvements going on. That's glass line piping that will help alleviate some of the pressure that is affecting the ability to move more solids to the digesters from the primary clarifiers. So, you know, there's a solids focus for this plan for sure because of the increased loading and the limitations that the plant currently has to handle that. And Patrick, feel free to chime in anytime. But, you know, a lot of the focus is on the digesters. When we do CEPT, and the load shift occurs, a lot more solids are going to be arriving at the digesters. If the 3 that we have, if the secondary is not converted to a primary, they will be overloaded. With 3 operating, they're in acceptable ranges. You know, there's some additional attention that can be paid for it, but that's basically the bottom line is that the conditions that are arriving in the future are going to be causing an increase in solids that need to be handled by our current facility. And, you know, just to reiterate, it's the chemically enhanced primary treatment that is happening. You know, we're studying that right now. We'll know later this year whether that's going to become a permanent feature of the facility, but for the planning purposes, it was assumed that it is. We're optimistic that the full-scale demonstrations that take place later this year will work. And then that coupled with the primary sludge line improvements will hopefully at least set us the basis for moving more solids to the digesters. So those are ongoing projects from the solids perspective. So with more solids in to the digesters, there's going to be, you know, more solids out. So the 3 filter presses that are there are not going to be capable of handling that additional load in the future. The dewatering building where the belt presses is too small to handle a 4th. So we're investigating alternative types of equipment, one being a rotary screw press, maybe a centrifuge. So that's something that's being pretty soon. There's piloted in May or June of this year to investigate alternatives. Again, just because a 4th filter press will not fit in the building that we currently have. So that was solids. The wet weather and the hydraulic improvements. Some of these should be, or you know, mainly is the 100 MGD improvement project. That's something that's going on right now in final design. And it's
just received the city's substantial design approval.
Okay. So that would see construction beginning likely. Soon,
There's a long
soon.
lead time on equipment, so maybe late next year.
But this is certainly what we call, and you'll see it in the capital improvement plan, an immediate term project. So we have immediate, near term, midterm, long term. This is an immediate term project that will be occurring this year, next year. And that will bring the capacity for wet weather to 100 million gallons per day, which is a significant improvement. And if you recall, when I was talking about the flow diagram for the existing conditions, the liquid stream is a step in sequence from screening all the way to discharge. What this will allow is a split in the liquid stream where rather than the trickling filters operating in sequence where it flows to the plastics and then through the rocks, there will be a split that allows the filters to be operated in parallel. And we can do that and still meet our permit requirement or effluent requirements.
And that's the 132.
And that's the 132, yeah.
132.
Yeah, so that project is being pushed a little bit. Our focus, as you are aware, our focus with the Act 537 planning is I&I removal. So once we make some progress on addressing I&I, then we can consider talking about taking the hydraulic improvements at a plant an additional 32 MGD.
And to clarify, it's still going to operate in series, 99% of the time. It needs to, you need both of those processes to remove the organics, you have a BOD limit, that's one of the main parameters you have to meet, but then you also have an ammonia limit. And so the second stage of trickling filters ensures that that's met. It still needs to operate in series most of the time, but the upgrades for hydraulically, to still operate in parallel like that or in series like that would be not really feasible. So this is what has been, developed by Kleinfelder, and we looked at it. It's basically short-term operation in this parallel mode, and that allows the hydraulic loading to be passed without a big impact on the effluent quality.
Yeah, good clarification. Yeah, keyword wet weather. Yeah, so not daily. Thank you, Patrick. And I mentioned that LCA is emphasizing our asset management planning and program in general. So we did a very thorough conditions assessment and criticality assessment of the systems and the individual assets that were critical. We evaluated 1,000 assets at the facility with the people who work with them daily, the operators, the managers, the people who really know how they function and what their condition is. And we were able to develop a prioritized list of high needs. So, immediate attention, and correlate that then to the capital improvement plan that was driven by this master planning. Building condition is also a focus area that I wanted to highlight. Again, I mentioned early on, one of the drivers is age. A lot of these buildings are old, not necessarily able to accommodate the staff in a way that lets them work to as best as they could. Some things are deteriorating. So just a few highlights: the dewatering building, the main pump house, and the auxiliary pump station were evaluated by the Black and Beach team. All the buildings that house staff were evaluated, but there were notable deficiencies in particular at these three buildings. And just some photos showing there's leakage coming through the floor where the belt filter presses are. So, and again, that leakage is not potable water. That's treated, that's untreated, well, partially treated, but it's sewage that's leaking through and damaging the rooms below. So you can see, that's an issue that we would like to have addressed. Same thing at the main pump house. There's some issues. The addition that is sticking out the front in that bottom left photo, notably has some odors, which could have, mold or just general poor ventilation. The skater server rack is located in near the heater, so it's in a bad area. There's just some general space usage that's not quite appropriate there. And at the auxiliary pump station, which is where the laboratory is, the lab functions, but there's a front part and a back part. There's some staff workflow issues. The technicians are eating lunch at their desks, literally inches from samples. So just some concerns there. So part of the master planning was an architectural assessment to really take a look at what we have, what we can make use of, how we can possibly renovate some things. So that went into it as well. So I'd like to, I guess, continue on to the capital improvement planning. My apologies for all the yellow, but I have a figure that correlates these immediate term projects, which we're calling 0 to 2 years, to a map. So I would just draw your attention to, we talked about chemically enhanced primary treatment. That's new. The primary sludge piping is new, which is happening this year. The 100 MGD improvements, that's happening. And then the architectural upgrades that I had just mentioned, we want to start, we have an engineer to begin, or engineer architect to begin looking at potential options. To at least get some of those immediate renovations underway to address what are health issues. Other than those, the rest of the projects that you see on the list were in the 2019 master plan in the original, and they would have been in years 5 to 10. So now that we're 5 years later, they shifted up to the immediate. But so the 4 or 5 new projects is what you heard me talk about in the previous minutes. Same thing here. So this is what we're calling near term. So again, I focused on the solids. The digesters need improvements, so they need mixing improvements, and then the dewatering capacity improvements. That's when I was talking about the filter press, the dewatering building not being able to accommodate a fourth. SCADA upgrades, that's not, I don't speak that language. Chris Mellon does, if anybody has questions. And then the architectural upgrades. And again, the remainder are projects that were identified in the 2019 plan that carried through. So in the next 5 years, we have identified approximately $100 million in projects that are necessary to keep the facility, to maintain the facility and get it into a condition that will accept future flows and loads. And as I said, the yellow was the immediate term. That's things that really need to happen, in the next 2 years. And then the burgundy is the near term, which is things that should be happening over the next 5 years. So essentially, all the solids improvements projects are immediate or near term. That really is a critical need to get the improvements to the solids handling processes, because that is our Achilles heel, I guess, if you will, to a certain extent. And then for the hydraulic improvements, it's the 100 MGD. I mentioned earlier that the 132, it's not on pause, but nothing will happen with that until we have an I&I removal program and show what we're doing to address that before we would consider taking additional hydraulic improvements at the plant. And then just some of the others, the architectural improvements. Sorry, that yellow is kind of shading out the green when it's on the big screen, but I mentioned the architectural improvements, improving the buildings, making the workspaces more pleasant for the staff that's there daily. And I would also point out the plastic media. So in the immediate term, meaning this year, next year, over the next 2 years, well, I think it's next year it will happen. Right, Andrew? Is the plastic number 4?
This year.
Late this year. So late this year, the media in plastic filter number 4 is going to be completely replaced. That is a big ticket item. On the heels of that, then through the next 5 years, the media for 1, 2, and 3 will also be replaced. So when I said $100 million for immediate and near term to get through the next 5 years, slightly over half of that is the 100 MGD project and the plastic replacements. So almost 60 million of that 100 is just those 2 projects, which are critical. The plastic media is old. So it is at the very end of its life and is critical to replace. So, and then years 5 to 10, I don't need to I won't harp on this too much. Many of the things we've already talked about and a lot of carryovers from the long-term projects that were in the 2019 master plan. Approximately 80 million in midterm projects and approximately 40 million in long-term projects, all of which are just getting bumped up or remaining in long-term from the 2019 master plan. Or there are things that once those 20 years are up, we're rehabbing again. So this mainly represents what the continual maintenance and rehab cycle for the systems at the plant. So, but I do want to focus, this was not something that was looked at too closely in 2019, but we did identify event-driven projects, almost exclusively projects that would result from changes to the effluent limits, primarily through the Delaware River Basin Commission. And with that, almost exclusively nitrogen. So phosphorus is also something that's in the DRBC limits. We don't really have a phosphorus issue. We don't receive a lot of it in the influent, but should the total nitrogen limits from a permitting perspective become more stringent, now we're talking about additional systems to handle that, to meet those effluent limits. This is also sort of a snowball effect. So we need first thing we need is denitrification filter. So if the DRBC changes their limitations to be more strict, we're talking about denitrification filter. We don't have the real estate to put them somewhere new. So as a result, we're going to be disturbing the footprint of the existing settling tanks, final settling tanks 1 to 4. Those would then become one larger settling tank. We also use currently one of the final settling tanks as the leachate tank. So if that becomes one, we then need a leachate tank. So you see the rectangle is the denitrifying filter. That snowballs into needing a replacement for the settling tanks. And that snowballs into requiring a new leachate tank. But again, that's event driven. We're aware of it. We'll be ready for it through Black and Beach's help with studying this. What makes the most sense. This is what makes the most sense from a planning perspective to have on the radar at some point. This could be part of a more serious discussion, but right now it's really just, we know what our permit effluent limitation or limits are, but we'll have this in our back pocket should we need it. I won't read every word on this page, but just a few studies that have been recommended for the immediate term: PFAS, and then the dewatering alternatives. Again, the dewatering alternatives, that's what I was talking about with the belt press and the alternatives to that, whether it's rotary, centrifugal, etc. Also nitrification stress testing. Again, the words of the day are solids handling and nitrification, and the secondary treatment process, because the bulk of it is a 2-stage trickling filtered plant that's been operating with the rock media as the original from 1928. So we are doing these things to preserve the integrity of those treatment systems. And then some other studies that we'll kick off as the years continue, but those are some of the big ones. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else, but that's my 15-minute. I don't know, 20 maybe. I don't know. It's close. Okay. So questions, discussion. Yeah. Yes.
I came in late, so forgive me if I ask a dumb question. You mentioned limitations due to the footprint down there. The amount of real estate we have, I guess. Is there any way that, looking way down the line, that we can do something about that? Do we need to do something about that in terms of adjacent real estate or?
Oh, you mean about talking about outside the plant?
Yes.
It's difficult because you can't really tell from this picture, but it's surrounded by a flood dike.
Oh, I know that, yeah.
So you have land available, but not necessarily usable land. And if you're to go up the hill, now you have the constraint of, either having to pump or do something to go up the hill. And then you have the railroad tracks on the southern side of the plant too. So as far as available real estate, you're not dealing with much.
There's no clever way to think about that. I'm looking, down,
Yeah, no, I follow what you're saying.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I don't have
Yeah.
an answer, but.
Yeah, I think like way down the line, and if nutrient limits, there's more certainty that was definitely happening, and there were more capacity issues, like there was a lot of growth and the flow had to go up even higher. I mean, you can see that about I don't know, 30% of the useful area there is these 100-year-old rock media treatment filters. You could put a more modern process in there to treat to take over the functions of both of those trickling filters or just the rock media trickling filters. But that wouldn't just be a very large impact of the site, which would be complicated to maintain plant operations during all that. It'd also be a huge, capital cost because it'd be new concrete, and getting rid of all that rock and all that stuff. So within the scope and like the concerns as they are about nutrient limits not being as immediate and, this makes sense. There's plants like this that meet these kind of nutrient limits. But they do kind of push towards more like higher operational cost, higher operational cost solutions because you have to like feed carbon to those, you have to feed some kind of methanol or something to those denitrifying filters. You need to, feed some coagulant to remove the phosphorus. So.
The other thing too that's been talked about a lot and was in the 537 plan was potentially pulling flow from the plant, and pretreatment plant's been studied over and over again, and converting that to full treatment and things like that to free up capacity if needed, just because of the land area. And chime in if I'm incorrect about that, but I know that's been discussed a lot. If, again, 50 years from now, 25 years from now,
Yeah, I'll chime in there. The current regulatory framework that's not palatable. The pre-treatment plant going to discharge, that's in the, way backyard.
Right.
But maybe, way down the road, perhaps that could be revisited, but now that's not happening.
No, I knew that, not right now, but that's been an option that's been discussed, right?
A question, excuse my newness to the board here, but looking at that last slide in terms of the compliance, meeting the compliance with the PFAS and the denitrification, it looked like what you said was you're gonna work to identify the industrial sources of it. I take it, my guess is that the strategy is to identify those sources, those key sources, and then work with those point sources to reduce whatever they might be putting into the system, as opposed to LCA gearing up to handle it downstream at Klein's Island. Is that kind of where you're headed? Is that my assuming?
Larger, yeah.
So we do have an approved EPA pretreatment program throughout the city and actually through all the municipalities. So one of the methods is to install a PFAS monitoring requirement for all of those industries that are likely to have PFAS within their waste stream. So we have initiated that last year. So we're collecting that data, and if there are opportunities to remove, eliminate, reduce, then that would be the avenue that we would want to take.
Any other questions?
And it's also the same with the nitrogen as well?
So that's a little bit more complicated because you actually create nitrates throughout the treatment process. So you have ammonia coming into the facility. As you convert it, it ends up as nitrate. So you don't necessarily have the same opportunities to reduce coming into the plant as you do for PFAS.
And most of the nitrogen is covered municipal sources from you and me and all the ratepayers and stuff. It's not, a lot of the industries are high organics, but not like high protein with high nitrogen. So there's some cities, that they some low hanging fruit might be, or nitrogen might be on the industrial side of things, but I don't think that's really the case here. The amount of nitrogen coming in is kind of normal. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions. First one, I guess it's an assumption just for the record that none of the workplace health issues are imminent in the sense of you got to do something about it right now. Like people can continue to work there and knowing that there's going to be a plan and then we work on those. Nothing has to be stopped, relocated, changed due to exposure in the areas of this that you identified.
When I was talking about these issues.
Yeah, those ones, yeah.
Yeah, no,
We did recoat the belt press floor to help stop those leaks. So I don't believe anything is actively leaking today.
Okay.
We recently did that within the last year. We're probably in the fall. I think it was in the fall.
Yeah, we wrapped up in the.
And we are working with a consultant to put together proposal for actual improvements. We had a while back done a design, preliminary design for renovations in the dewatering building with their locker room and office space and their break room space. And we are going to work to advance that and then go out to construction to make those improvements. So we are actively working on those spaces as well as in the main pump station and those offices that have some leak and potential mold issues. So we're actively working to resolve that, but I don't think there is an immediate need to vacate the areas. We don't have any known
Stating my question there.
health concerns.
I got a couple other ones as well. Well, there's a lot of work here, that's one thing. I guess all this has to be done whilst the whole system is kept running.
Correct.
Yes.
There's a complexity factor there.
Definitely.
In my head, as I'm listening to this, and it pertains to Ted's question, I'm thinking, well, I wonder what would happen. How much would it cost if you built a completely parallel system for the future right next to it and then shut this down the road? And what would that look like? Is that 100 million? Because 100 million these days doesn't go very far. So.
Yeah.
No.
Keep going.
So these renovations are less than the cost of an all new facility to do the same thing. So that's good. That's good. But it makes your life miserable when you try and do all this. That sort of leads to my other thought on this whole thing, which was when you come to manage this, I mean, where's the front? Are we 50 years, when we're all done with this, are we good for 50 years of growth, or Phil will probably know that. I mean, I'm just wondering, how far out is the horizon by the time we're done?
So our planning horizon was 2050. So,
20 years. 25.
but and a lot, yeah, call it 25.
Okay.
25 years.
With this going on over a 5 to 10 year period.
Yeah, but the caveat that I would throw there is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the improvements, not just the rehabilitation, but the actual upgrades to the systems, that's front loaded in that 25 years. So then when you look at the long-term projects, they're almost exclusively just rehab. Right. So 25 years is the horizon. However, at the end of that, it doesn't mean that you all of a sudden need 120 million of new projects again.
Yeah, to maintain those projects that you've put in place.
Yes.
I was just trying to get a sense for what the investment was giving us. Thanks.
Anybody else? We good? So since Amir's not here, I will ask a question that I think he would ask. So as far as the 2019 master plan, do we have a scorecard of, the short-term improvements that were recommended and what's actually been completed? I know there's a lot of 2019 carryover, but that's because those were, time frame is now, in the 5 to 10 year window that we're in that plan. So as far as any short-term,
I did not include it in this presentation, but that's actually one of the first activities that we did is we gave them a list of all the projects that have been completed. Most work, so most of the 0 to 5 work.
Okay, great.
Or we're like ongoing.
Or we're ongoing. I'll just highlight the OCU 24 building. That was something that was listed as immediate and hasn't been addressed yet, but we are planning on addressing that in the next 2 years.
Okay.
But by and large, the 0 to 5 projects that were identified in 2019 were or are actively being addressed right now.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so moving on with the agenda, now that we have a quorum, we will move back to approval of the minutes from the April 14th, 2025 board meeting. So I need a motion to approve.
I move the minutes be approved. No changes.
I'll second it. Second. Okay, so we have Linda and then Peter. And then just do a yay or nay, no roll call, right? Okay, now, all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
Mr. Vice Chairman,
Yes.
just for the record, we had Kevin Baker attend to, enter the meeting at 12:07, which is when the quorum was officially attained. So.
Great, thank you. All right, so under action items, we have a few today. So starting with finance and administration, we have a omnibus resolution update.
Yes, this I hope will be somewhat straightforward. In January, the board entertained an omnibus resolution related to delegated responsibilities and kind of consolidating a whole history of old resolutions into one comprehensive resolution. And over the course of the last 3 months of trying to implement the items that are in here, and specifically as it relates to the purchasing thresholds, we realized that there was a gap in how it was prepared. So on page 5, there is one small change that has been recommended by the staff to update this resolution. On page 5, you'll see this chart at the top relates to capital expenditure approval thresholds. And we've got a variety of things here, upsizing and extensions less than $250,000 can be approved by staff. Standalone engineering studies less than $100,000 can be approved by staff. Construction projects less than $250,000 approved by staff. And then the next one, for projects budgeted more than $250,000, all professional services less than $100,000 in preliminary design phase only. That's created some gaps, that word preliminary, because we've run into situations where we have a professional service authorization for a relatively small amount with no construction contract or anything like that associated with it. It's not preliminary design, it's regular design phase. And we think that there's no description of when those come to the board. So we think that removing the word preliminary will address that ambiguity, because it could be a $15,000 professional service authorization in that phase, and we don't think that that's the intention of the board to see those. So by removing the word preliminary, we think we're squared up again with how we expected this to work. And so that's the only change that we're requesting, and the rest of the resolution is as you already approved it. So we put it together as a new resolution, and I think in talking with our solicitor, this is the format that we expected to use going forward. Whenever there's a change in the resolution or recommended change, we would just reauthorize the entire resolution. So it's a free, clean, fresh, current copy. So any questions about that change or anything else that's in the resolution?
So you can actually get rid of the other one.
Yeah, then the new one will be this one for everything.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah.
Kevin, any comments, since this is a resolution?
No, if it would please the vice chair, I'll give a little brief.
Can you read the whole thing?
Yeah.
Yes, brief.
The whole bolded part at the beginning. This is for consideration for the board at its April 28th, 2025 meeting. It's resolution number 4-2025-2. And it's a resolution confirming approval and signatory powers for certain contracts, agreements, financial transactions, authority documents, and authority operations. And it's a modification of a prior resolution as set forth by Lisa.
So we need a motion to approve this resolution that
I
Kevin
move what Kevin said.
described. Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman, this is Mark. I'll second that.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So we have Linda and Mark. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
Thank you very much.
All right, the next item we have is the bondholder consent project. Potentially move ahead on getting some adjustments made, I believe, to the indenture for the current Allentown water and sewer lease bonds.
Yep, and these are the yellow pages in your packet if you're following online. It starts on page 17 of the packet. For this, I'll turn over to Ed and his team to review.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind putting up the presentation.
Right, the other presentation, sorry.
Yeah,
Yes, while she's putting that up, I'm gonna summarize essentially why we are sitting here. Is that I am looking for the board to authorize almost a $2 million project expenditure for the purpose of retaining or obtaining bondholder consent to effect a change to the current indenture in the city division bond indenture that will ultimately allow us to do business with Penvest and have the terms and conditions that would be acceptable to them for the purpose of giving us grants and low interest loans. Background wise, I think almost a year ago, we went to close on a loan. Am I in the right time frame? Went to close on a combination grant and loan and were unable to do so because there were some conditions in the indenture that were not really amenable to Penvest as a result of the funding being more of the federal nature than just the state background. So given that, I believe in January, the board actually had to rescind the offer. And since that point in time, we've been struggling with a way to deal with how can we allow ourselves to be in a position where we can do these transactions with Penvest, fit their compliance terms, and do what we need to do to benefit the ultimate customers of the city division with the infrastructure improvements that we need to make. We've posed a number of different changes to Penvest, and I'll just summarize it. At the end of the day, I think there was like 12 different scenarios where we thought maybe they would be amenable to, and they're not. And I understand that they have some federal requirements that basically allow them to not be as flexible as we would like. So ultimately, the conclusion arrived by us was that we would be better off asking the bondholders to allow for us to change some position with respect to subordinate debt that exists in the indenture. And as a result, we have put together a team of people and companies to seek that bondholder approval. This is sort of new to all of us, including myself. Probably not new to some of the team members. So I will ask for the PowerPoint. So I think I gave a little bit of the background. We would like to continue to use Penvest for the grant and long-term financing. It is a strategic imperative for us, and that is, you know, my concern is we need to do something that's going to allow us to partake now and allow us to continue as LCA moves on in infrastructure improvements and be able to obtain grants and loans in the future at a low interest rate. So that's kind of what's driving all this. The indenture itself would require a 51% approval of the bondholders to the new language in the indenture. The other alternatives that we kind of looked at was refinancing 51% of the outstanding debt. That was one of the things that popped up in the alternatives. And at this point in time, market-wise, that is really expensive. And the other, so that was why we settled on obtaining consent from the 51%.
It might be worthwhile adding that in 2020, we actually obtained bondholder consent by refinancing 51% of the debt. And the good news there is we saved, you know, over $10 million in that refinance.
$24 million net present value saving, because that figure will never leave my mind.
Not in the same economic conditions.
No, the economic conditions are really amenable to that. So we're kind of in the last alternative option.
So, Ed, just real quick, just ballpark numbers. So the existing bonds percentage versus if you were to refinance, are you looking at 3 to 5? Like, what are the, like, that makes it unaffordable?
You're talking about rates?
Yeah,
I'll let Chris
I've
answer.
calculated that if we try to refinance 51% of the debt, it would cost us $76 million right now.
That's going the other way. So we've gone from a present value of $24 million to another
yeah.
negative of $76 million. So you're actually losing $100 million.
And is that worth it to do business with Penvest?
Well, we'll talk about some of the things that I think make it at least worth looking at the bondholder consent process. Okay.
It gives us another avenue, is what you're saying.
This, to be honest with you, the approach that I'm proposing to you today is pretty much the avenue that we have said is what we're gonna have to do right now if we want to do this. Or decide that we are not interested in pursuing grants and loans through Penvest and just going out to the bond market. We have some economics on all of that as we move.
Let me just ask one other question. So in theory, though, if we filed, and maybe this isn't a great option either, if we filed an application with Penvest, they deny it, that's a formal action. In theory, we could appeal it and potentially fight this. Because didn't they actually, they've already approved other Penvest loans in the past, and maybe this is a discussion for executive session or something, but I mean, that's maybe not a great alternative, but certainly an option.
I'll speak a little bit to it. I know I think Tim is on the line as
Yes,
well.
we have Tim Forsman, who is bond counsel online. I mean, I have some people on, so before I let Kevin, let me introduce. Tim, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, we have new board member.
Sure. Excuse me. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tim Horstman. I'm an attorney with McNeese Wallace and Merrick, and I've been serving as your bond counsel in connection with the city division bonds since the initial concession agreement was executed back in 2013.
I'll start a little bit, Jeff, and then Tim certainly chime in and correct me if I'm wrong. I'm targeting specifically this last issue, Jeff. All right, I'm not going to speak to other issues, but to this last issue, my understanding is these were passed through federal funds, okay? And that was the issue that created the problem here based upon the current indenture language. There have been other Penvest loans, certainly on the suburban side, I also believe on the city side as well, but those didn't necessarily have this issue per se with the federal language. And Tim, feel free to fill in the gaps or correct as appropriate.
Sure. So I can elaborate on that. So the authority has executed Penvest loans on the city division side in the past, most recently just a couple years ago. But Kevin was correct. The issue now is the specific source of funding for this program that offers a mix of grants and loans. These are federal funds, and there's been what I would describe as an evolution of Penvest's position on this. We were able to close a transaction a couple of years ago where we ultimately negotiated where the authority used cash on hand to complete the project, and then subsequently, after the project was completed, closed on the Penvest loan to reimburse the authority for the project costs. That was intended to be the structure for that loan, and then we had agreed on and this, we discussed this back in January, but so I'll keep it brief. But we had what we thought was a resolution of this issue to close on the more recent loan. Penvest subsequently came back and said that structure would no longer work. Just speaking in terms of the Penvest position here, I have been routinely in touch with the chief counsel over at Penvest, Sean Weiss, and this is not an issue that is just limited to this authority and this indenture. The issue that Penvest has is statewide. We've had this issue come up in multiple transactions in Pennsylvania to our great frustration. And I've been told from Sean Weiss that this is also an issue in other states. Other states have taken different positions. In some states, the state has simply said we're not going to do funding for transactions where there is an indenture in place. Other structures that have been rejected involve subordinate debt obligations like the one that Penvest has agreed to here. So it's not just an issue for Pennsylvania, it's not just an issue in Pennsylvania for LCA, and it is not an issue that is limited to just Pennsylvania. So multiple states have had this issue, but going forward, we've identified the specific provisions in the indenture that Penvest has objected to, and the hope here is that we can amend the indenture with bondholder consent so that LCA can begin to secure this very lucrative source of grant funding, both for the current fiscal year, and the hope would be that additional grant funds would be available in the next fiscal year, pending, of course, any future developments at the EPA. I just spoke with Sean Weiss last week, and she told me that there's been no change as of last week in terms of what the EPA's position is. So this issue remains, it is still present now and appears to be present going forward, assuming funding is made available.
Thank you.
A question on that issue.
You're welcome.
Is there any way to further investigate the availability of this federal funding, given the pullback that's currently happening big time coming out of DC?
Sure, yeah. So that and Sean at Penvest, that's what they've been pursuing. You know, there's been a lot of discussion over that over the last 3 months or so. That's been where they've been looking at the issue and making sure that the funding is still available. Obviously, you know, we're still very early on in the current fiscal year. You know, there's a lot that's going to be done in the next few months at the federal level, both in terms of, you know, the budget for the next year as well as tax policy for the foreseeable future. So a lot could change. I can't say with any certainty as to, you know, what may happen in the next fiscal year at the federal level as well as tax policy. But what we do know for right now is that there is at least one grant and loan proposal on the table. And I think that's addressed in one of the slides, Ed. So we can at least pursue, you know, this amendment process, knowing that there is one loan and grant on the table that has been made available to the authority.
Yeah, just to final comment, I'll shut my mouth. The Boys and Girls Club of Allentown just notified Friday afternoon they lost $300,000 in an approved grant from the feds, and already planned to spend the money, hire somebody. It's gone. That was the Boys and Girls Club.
Yeah, like Tim.
Yeah, this issue. I'm sorry. This issue came up earlier this year. There was a lot of questions as to whether you know, the DEP's funding from the feds would be available to Penvest this year. We inquired about that and were assured that the money had already been appropriated and had been, in fact, released to the Commonwealth. So, you know, from what we've been told, there's no impact on the current fiscal year, you know, ending September 30th of this year. Current fiscal year funding available to Penvest to fund, you know, the current year's loan and grants.
So in conjunction with what Tim said, we have something staring at us right now. We would like to be able to settle on the way that we can get at that in terms of what's already out there. We think that the best thing for LCA is that we do what we need to do to make sure that in the future, when these opportunities present themselves, that we could partake of. And that's what this is about. So on the project side, you introduced Tim. Chris, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Certainly. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Gibbons. I'm with Concord Public Financial Advisors, and we serve as the financial advisor to the authority.
So also involved in the project would be Goldman Sachs and Company. I know that Frida is not available, but I know that Ken and Bruno are. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Ukigwe. I work on our municipal syndicate desk. I've been in the business for call it 10 years or so. On top of my role as like an underwriter, I also lead our liability management efforts. So all of our municipal consents and tenders, for example, all run through myself and our desk. And I'm joined by my colleague Bruno, who's one of our core coverage Pennsylvania bankers on our team. So happy to be with you all.
Thank you. So I think we covered the players on the project.
Are you done with this slide?
Bruno, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, happy to. So I'm Bruno Zuccolo. I'm with Ken from the Goldman side. As Ken mentioned, I work closely with Frida Wong on a lot of Pennsylvania coverage, water and wastewater issuers across the country, and excited to be working with the authority on this one.
Thank you. Okay, next. So I said it was almost in the neighborhood of $2 million, and this is kind of the breakdown on it between financial advisor and bond counsel. King Spry, the Goldman Sachs again and company will be doing the bond solicitation, but will act as bond solicitation agent. Globic Advisors will be what I would call the tally agent. There's also DTC fees, which are associated with the mechanics of the bond tallying process itself. So altogether, you're talking about almost $801,000 worth of professional services. As we have come to learn, if you want a vote from the bondholders, you are more than likely going to have to pay something for that. And that would be in the neighborhood of $1 million. And so altogether, you're talking about almost $2 million with contingency of 10%. I've told it up to $1,993,000, but for the sake of argument, we'll say $2 million.
So can somebody chime in on the consent fee? I mean, so the 0.25%, okay, but could that number be 2%? Could that number be, I mean,
That was the range estimated by Goldman Sachs and others. By the way, we went through an RFP process to select Goldman Sachs. The way we did that is we went back to the lead underwriters of the three largest bond financings we've done over the years. It was Goldman, RBC Capital Markets, as well as Morgan Stanley. Goldman gave us the best proposal. That's how we got here. So as part of Goldman's proposals and the other proposals, they actually said, we think there's a range between 0.1% and 0.25%. So we're trying to be conservative here and saying 0.25, but until we talk to the bondholders, we don't know an actual number.
Thank you.
Just to check understanding. So it's a modification of the indenture, which presumably gives the bondholder less security, in theory, in return for their fee.
So, Tim, you could probably detail the real language of it, but I'll summarize it. Essentially, the issue is not at the primary bondholder lien level. It is more along the lines of the subordinate debt level. So essentially what we're doing is asking them to allow for language changes that would allow the subordinate lien position to be a little bit different than in the indenture, but it is not in any way, shape, or form changing the position of the primary bondholders.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
That's correct, Ed.
I'll start it and then
What we're talking about.
First of all, primary bondholders are the guys that own the bonds right now. They get paid first. That's why they're primary. Secondary they get paid second after the primary bondholders get paid.
Who are secondary bondholders?
At this point, we don't have any, but it would be in this case, Penvest. Penvest would be a secondary bondholder.
Thank you.
And then I don't know, the gentleman from Goldman, I guess we got to this point of making the presentation, quite frankly, based on the discussions we had with Goldman, where they think that their initial assessment is that they think they can get this 51% pass. I don't know, Ken, if you have any color on that or not, that might be worthwhile saying.
You're on mute, Ken.
Thank you, Bruno. We actually have done a handful of some of these consents for the last couple of years, and what you're kind of working through with the bondholders has ranged significantly. So, for example, we did one consent where we had an issuer who wants to remove like parts of their gains and revenues from what they're called the income available to debt service for their covenants, which I would probably classify as a more extreme change to what we're doing here to senior holders. And for that one, for example, we got that done for an eighth, so 125 per bond or 0.125%. So it kind of depends on who, and then we also just did a consent too for the city of Atlanta a couple of weeks ago. Bruno also worked with me on that one, and we ended up for that one also for eighth getting them to adjust what was pledged to bondholders. So they substituted parking that's ultimately going to be replaced in the future. Now, when you kind of think of what we're looking to do here, kind of as was mentioned here, the view here is that we're not touching in terms of the senior lien. So really you're just kind of focusing on what rights subordinate holders hold. Now I think in general from an investor perspective, anytime you touch docs in terms of getting to focus on the change and what you're doing, there's going to be some scrutiny that come here. But at least in the kind of scope of changes that we've worked on in the past, I definitely would say that this doesn't appear to be the hardest consent that we have done. And at least from our initial view of the documents, we think that based on what we see from the limited foresight of holders we have, that there should be a pathway in terms of working through what PennVest is looking to do, as well as that explaining and marketing this to investors, so that we could get a set of docs that allow you guys to all utilize the PennVest funding while still having bondholders get on board here with those changes. So that's where we kind of came from when we gave these estimates. Of the 4 municipal consents we've done, we've had one that reached the 0.25% fee. So not to say that's not impossible. And of course, everything's always subject to an investor by investor dialogue and conversation. For example, Vanguard is one of the larger holders here. So what Vanguard's opinion here will matter to some extent. But I guess one thing that is positive is that Vanguard has been constructive on past consents that we've done, and we have a good relationship with them. So based on that as well, and we think that there's a good opportunity here to get something done on behalf of LCA.
Thank you. Tim, you had wanted to say something and I cut you off.
No, I just wanted to add, it was kind of covered, but just a little bit more background on the reason for the consent and what we're asking. It goes down to what PennVest can do if LCA fails to complete the project with the subject to the terms and conditions of the PennVest grant. That's really what the issue is. PennVest wants to have absolute assurance that it can claw back the funds. And as a subordinate bondholder, it's subject to certain covenants and restrictions currently. So we're looking to modify that, remove some of those more restrictive provisions while still preserving the senior bondholders priority lien. So not changing the current lien structure, just removing some of those more restrictive covenants so that PennVest has assurances that it can recoup the funds that it advances if the project is not completed subject to the terms and conditions.
Thank you. Okay, next. This is a little bit more detail on what we see as the benefits. I mean, at this point in time, in terms of grant funding, we were staring at $60 million of grant funding, more specifically related to the lead service line replacement activities that are going to go on over a large number of years. So what we're trying to do here is look at, so we're going to spend almost $2 million. What do we get in return for that? And again, the potential $60 million worth of grants. Actually, we just looked at it in a more simplistic manner. If we only got $2 million in grants, you would actually pay for the bondholder consent process. That is gonna cost $2 million. In terms of the combination
Excuse me, would you please explain that?
so essentially, we're gonna spend $2 million.
Yes.
Okay, so if we got grants for $2 million, free money. Essentially, we just paid for this whole process of getting the bondholder consent versus not being able to get it at all now.
You can get it from anybody else.
But no, not free money, no.
So it's free money, just
Right.
you don't pay for it.
Yes. Yes, that's one. So if we're gonna spend $2 million, we should be able to get at least $2 million back on a return basis. And we're staring at maybe 60. What I'm trying to do with this is justify some economics to you that say, why would you want to spend $2 million in, this would be why. That we'll get if we get $60 million in grant money, we just paid for the bonds plus. For the bondholder consent.
I bear with me, I'm just confused on this. I don't understand how you get, people give you money, and we don't pay interest on it, we don't pay any fee for it, we just get the money.
If I could just talk a little bit about the PennVest program. The PennVest program right now has this huge influx of cash from the federal government to address key issues in Pennsylvania, lead service line replacements and drinking water treatment systems for PFAS. Those two programs have a big infusion of cash from the federal government for utilities. And they are going out to utilities in these combination funding offers of, they call them principal forgiveness loans and regular loans. Principal forgiveness loans is just a fancy way of saying it's a grant, but it's still federal money. So because it's federal money, for us to receive that grant money, we have to adhere to all the federal requirements like Build America, Buy America, and American Iron and Steel and prevailing wage, all those kinds of things. And that's really where PennVest, as Tim was trying to explain, PennVest has an issue of if we complete the project but don't follow those federal requirements, PennVest needs a way to get that money back from us. Right now, they can't because of the way our bond indenture is written. So by getting the consent on the bond indenture, it now makes us eligible to receive those grants through PennVest. But I wanted to say also that while this is a big infusion of cash right now for these programs, the PennVest program is what's called a state revolving fund. And these are very popular programs. They're not going to go away. So even if that large extra money that's going to PennVest goes away, the state revolving fund will continue to be funded by the federal government. And we will continue to have to, if we want to use PennVest, comply with their requirements.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Okay?
Yeah.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I'm just trying to say that you don't spend $2 million to make
In other words,
make sense.
PennVest is the source of this federal funding,
Yeah.
and nobody else has it but PennVest.
Correct.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Looking at it a different way, we started to compare, if we didn't do this at all, we would have to borrow at 4.5% interest rate compared to a 1.5% interest rate. So actually, for each million that we borrow, the savings would be $367,000. So all we would need to do is borrow $5 million and you paid for the $2 million as well. So I'm just, in summarizing, I'm just saying it is economically in our best interest to do something, to spend the $2 million to get what we see out there as a potential return.
Doesn't bullet number 3 really make your case without almost anything else?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Just confirming, I'm just.
Yeah, I mean, if we got no grants at all, I mean, just the interest savings would be worth it.
If I could just touch on that third, the existing funding offer. That existing funding offer is a $12 million offer. As you can see, it's split 6.3 million in grants, 5.7 in loan. Penvest has agreed for the time being to just hold that funding offer for us while we try to figure this out. It's not they're not going to hold it forever, but they've given us some assurances that they'll extend the closing deadline for this one so that we can take advantage of it for our next phase of lead search line replacements.
That was one of my questions, you said you gotten 51% before of
Yes.
bondholder.
Yes, we did.
What was your time frame on that one?
We did it in probably a span of 4 or 5 months.
Okay, so that's what we're looking at also.
In this case, it's more condensed. That was an actual financing. I was just trying to be conservative on how long it takes to do a financing.
Okay.
Interest rates were just so low in 2020, around the COVID time, that we were able to refinance and still get that condition on the bonds of the new bonds, the 51% of the bonds, and save money. It was, kind of a unicorn kind of
I just
situation.
remember when we did discuss this before, one of the reasons we didn't want to do it was because of the length of time that might be involved in trying to get the 51% versus another form of financing. And you discussed going over all those other forms.
You are correct. When we first looked at that, we were not sure what that bond consent process would be like. At the same time, though, the market became a whole lot more favorable for us to even disregard the consent process and actually get the consent by default by retiring more than 51% of the existing bondholders. So it was kind of like, well, interest-wise, it was the best thing to do, and it also served another need.
Because I remember having that discussion with Ed in 2020, essentially, hey, we might have to go to bondholders. I said, we might have an easier and more cost-effective idea, just refinance a portion of the bonds. That's what we did.
Yeah, unfortunately, at this point in time, the market conditions are not favorable to doing that.
I think one last thing I want to mention, Penvest just had a meeting last week, in which they awarded between grants and low interest financing about $242 million. And they do this on a quarterly basis. I just thought it important to note that this goes on at Penvest, every quarter, and that's just what they did last week.
So I'm shortening this slide up. It's a little bit longer than we originally thought it was. I mean, we were talking about 4 to 6 weeks, and actually the consent process is 11 days. So a much smaller time frame than actually we ever imagined it would take. That is kind of it. So I'm really sitting here saying $2 million to get a lot of good possibilities. There's a lot of good economics. And I'm asking for board approval to go ahead and start this.
What happens if we don't get consent?
If we don't get consent, I'll let Goldman Sachs chime in afterward, but the original, I guess the thought would be if we don't get consent on the first round, we'll try another round.
Yeah, so generally with the consents, I guess the beauty of the process to some extent is that the consent doesn't go through, things stay the same. You just kind of go through the process of trying to get changes. Now, in terms of the consents we've done, for the majority of them, we've got them through on the first go. You do have the opportunity after the initial one expires, you'll get reads from accounts apart. What we'll do is with the bondholders that we know that hold the bonds, try to figure out what do they need to get the consent or what and how they voted. And if we see certain accounts voted no and know what we need to offer or amend to get them to say yes, you may then relaunch after those discussions to then get them across the line. We did do one consent, but it was for an unrated issuer, so a little bit different situation than yourself where we did go a second time and then use those modifications to get it across the line. So that does happen from time to time, but I wouldn't say it's a base case. But you can technically pursue the consent as much as you want in terms of modifying it based on whether it's a negotiation or even modifying the timing. And we've also worked on consents where they've been contingent consents. Like in this situation, because you have the loans lined up, I think it's a little bit different. But if there was a situation where you want the consent to go through subject to you getting a final approval from Penvest on the grants, that's something that you also could structure into your consents also. So there's a little bit of flexibility in terms of how it's managed in that standpoint. But at least if you go in and don't get it, nothing changes with the outstanding docs.
We pay more if we have to go back.
So there is a slight fee from PTC in terms of relaunching the process, but from the scope of the fee projections you have, the majority, whether it's legal or for our fee, for example, doesn't change generally when you like reissue and what you go out to bondholders. If they ask for more money, then that may go up. But in terms of just a general, there's a DTC relaunch fee and some other kind of ancillary expenses from Globic. But from the other components or fees there are generally not really modified if you relaunch, unless you're going out maybe 3, 4, 5 times, which is more abnormal in these processes.
Ken, could you also comment on when we had discussions leading to this meeting, quite frankly, you had mentioned, or Goldman had mentioned, well, we'll actually go out to the bondholders before we actually ask for their vote. So we'll have kind of an initial discussion and feel for them way in advance of the vote, correct?
Yeah, so we also, part of our process and structure when we run these consents is that we recommend issuing an EMA notice, which we look to do here, and that will just preview for it to accounts in terms of what we're looking to do so they understand the changes before we go out. That way it allows us at least to go out to a couple of the largest holders and make sure that they understand what we're doing and what we're going to change in principle, so that if anyone has any big concerns, we could either say like, okay, this is what we need to change now to give us a chance to get this across the line on the first go, or somehow, which I think is extremely unlikely, they just say this is a non-starter. We know before you pay those fees to launch or go out with the consent to help de-risk the process.
We go through the process, we get the 51%, this kind of thing. And then we go to PennDOT, we get the money that they're supposedly holding for us, correct? PennVest, excuse me. And we get the money they're supposed to be holding, and that's federal money. Okay. Now, if we go after another PennVest loan from just their revolving fund though, that's not, we don't have to go through this again. If we go after federal money through PennVest, do we have to go through this process again?
I'll start and let Tim finish. So the intent here is to open up the window beyond one transaction. The intent here is to, as Tim, I think, said earlier, there's some restrictive covenants within the indenture, at least from the perspective of PennVest, that does not allow them to claw back. So the language that's going to be proposed is going to be eliminating those restrictive covenants such that someone like PennVest will be amenable to issuing a subordinate debt under the indenture. And Tim, feel free to add.
Yeah, that's correct, Kevin. This indenture change will apply forevermore. So if there is, a future PennVest a future PennVest application, we're going to be using the current, the revised indenture documents. The only way that there would be an issue would be if there was a future federal law change or policy change that then flows down to PennVest, resulting in a further objection. Is that possible? Yes, that of course is possible. But we are amending the indenture now to address all the objections that Penvest currently has. And we'll of course get Penvest to sign off on the amendment before it's submitted to the bondholders.
Okay, any other board questions? So in my humble opinion, I think it's a very worthwhile effort. I don't see any other good options. Seems like you guys have thoroughly exhausted all the other potential options. So that being said, we need a motion to authorize pursuit of bondholder consent, retaining services from various legal and financial advisors, potentially incurring costs up to $2 million. Is that the approval we're looking for? So I need a motion, please.
Mr. Chairman, this is Mark. I'd like to thank everybody for the enlightenment. It's quite an interesting discussion. I'd like to move forward and recommend this.
Thank you, Mark.
Second.
And second by Linda. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? The ayes have it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Appreciate the help in the presentation.
Okay. Moving on, the last agenda or action item is lead service line replacement project cycle 1, approval of a plumbing contract.
Yes, okay, so for this one, I'll introduce, you've met him before, Rennie Keen Dingle, our new compliance lead program manager, and also Chris Mon, you all know him as our director of service and technology. Just to tee things up, a reminder in January, this is all related to the Penvest action that we took in January. What we did at that time was to decline the funding that Penvest had offered us. And then we presented an alternative approach to implementing the phase 1 or pilot project for lead service line replacements, whereby Chris and his team primarily were going to be handling the project in-house. At the time that we presented it to the board for that amendment to the construction phase authorization, we also said we had the need for private plumbing contract, but didn't have that lined up at this point. So that's where we are right now, why we're asking for this very specific approval. And Rennie, I'm going to share just a little background about how we got to this recommendation.
Hi, everyone. Rennie Keendega, I'm the lead program and compliance manager. I'll speak up because we have the AC run right now, but we had to reject the Penvest funding. And so we internally discussed if we could do the cycle 1 project internally. We decided we could do that, but we needed help with the private plumber. So over the past few months, we've been negotiating and talking with various plumbing contractors to see what their services were, their scope, their knowledge, and what they could offer to us. And through that, we really focused on Gentis Plumbing. They came to us and we had several meetings with them. I went out in the field and watched them do some work while they were replacing a private line. And they're all in to help us with this project. They have at least one full-time crew dedicated, and they're working to get a second full-time crew dedicated to pulling the private lines while we pull the public lines. Their quotes came in kind of with everyone else's, and through doing some of the field work, they're at that number. And so we feel comfortable using them for the cycle 1 project, which is going to focus on about 150 customers in the city of Allentown, as a way to kind of refine our processes for moving forward with this lead service line replacement project program that we're gonna have to go through for the next 10 to 13 years. So we're asking for your approval to use Gentis as our preferred plumbing contractor for the cycle 1 project. Chris, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to it.
The second piece to this is also recognition that we also will encounter the need to do private signed replacements that are not part of the project.
Yep.
And so, I mean, Chris, you can talk a little bit about how often that happens throughout the year and when you need to have that type of on-call.
It happens probably as regular as you would imagine. And this happens normally when we're in the streets doing a service side leak on our side. When we do our, dig out, we realize that the private side subsequently is lead, and based on new regulation. And luckily, the partnership that we're looking to get with the Gentis, they've been remarkably responsive to our calls. We are limited on time to get these lines pulled out once we do find them, once it's the official term, disturbance. Once the disturbance has happened, which apparently is anything from breaking ground above it to turning off the curb stop for service work. We are down to 45 days to get that line removed, information to the customers, and the Gentis so far to date has been a remarkable partner in that.
So to keep the authorizations kind of clean, we're asking for two separate things. First is the authorization to enter into a contract with the Gentis for the cycle 1 lead service line replacement project. When the board took action back in January, you approved the funds already for it, even though we put a big to be determined on who the plumbing contractor would be. The $550,000 that the board authorized at that time, we believe is adequate to cover this contract with the Gentis for phase 1. And then the second part is that we'd like to negotiate and execute contract with the Gentis for ongoing as needed operational and emergency private plumbing work for that service line replacement.
So do we want to do one approval or should we do two separate approvals? What's the preference?
I think that's really your call. I think they're outlined in the memo together, so they could be done together.
Okay. All right. So
I have a quick question.
Go ahead. Yes.
Is this all Davis Bacon work?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
This Davis Bacon work.
This is
prevailing wage?
self-funded, so we have nothing other than
Oh, you're not
LCA.
using the federal money.
Right.
Sorry. Okay, you're right.
However, I guess we should comment that Agentis is on CoStar, so we're at least following a process for the selection of the contract. Yeah.
So any other questions? All right, so we're looking for a motion for approval of two items. To one, authorize staff to execute a contract with the Gentis Plumbing to perform the private plumbing work required within the lead service line replacement program cycle 1 project. And then two, we're authorizing staff to negotiate and execute a contract with the Gentis Plumbing to perform private plumbing work required on an as-needed basis.
I'll make that motion.
Peter? Motion by Peter. We need a second. Second by Ted. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Ayes have.
Thank you very much.
All right, so monthly project updates, we do not do at this meeting. Next would be the monthly financial review. Back to Ed.
So you get to hear me again. How about that? So this is a report on what we did in March and year-to-date March, and kind of a look at where I think we are and where we're gonna go. Without spending a whole lot of time on just the month, this is what the month looked like. In total, we were on the positive side, net income, but on the negative side for cash flow. As you look at suburban water, we were favorable and wastewater was favorable and city was favorable. So it was all good on the income side compared to forecast for the month. Not as good on the cash flow side. Water was favorable, but wastewater and city were unfavorable. And overall, we finished a little bit unfavorable to forecast for the month. So year to date, which would be more what I'm focusing on, suburban on the income side. We have almost $5 million of total LCA income. We're $2.6 million better than forecast. Individually, water is favorable. Wastewater was unfavorable a little bit, and city division was largely favorable, which helped us on the income side. On cash flows, we were a little bit short on the suburban water side. Wastewater is good. City division is good by $2.1 million. So LCA finished $2.2 million better than forecast across the entire business. All right, for the full year, we kind of started the year off with paying attention to the budget, kind of staying in line with budget. So I really didn't forecast much different than laying out the budget and the time frame within the budget. So we didn't have any variances on the net income side. The only thing on cash flows and why I have a difference there is, if you remember back in 2024 for wastewater, we borrowed $11 million. There was $5 million worth of stuff for 2024 and $6 million worth of projected spending, budgeted spending that was more toward 2025. So when we did the budget back in August, we weren't sure what we were going to do. So ultimately, we're not going to borrow as much in 2025 because we already borrowed. So that's going to give us a cash flow deficit of $4.1 million, but explainable. So on the suburban water side, income for year to date, we're 17,000 favorable, combination of some favorable variances and some unfavorable variances. On the operating revenue side, we're down a little bit. Operating expenses are up a bit, but we're getting some help from interest income that's driven pretty good favorable variance, and then interest expenses just a little bit off. So you got some pluses and minuses. Overall, it nets out to $17,000 worth of favorable variance. Again, full year, I didn't even do the graph because we really just held the budget. Cash flows, $216,000 total unfavorable variance. If you look at cash from operations, we're down just a tiny bit, not much in terms of debt service. Predominantly, the biggest variance there is our CapEx spending was higher than what we had forecasted, although we made up some of it with better interest income. Full year, nothing, no difference. In terms of key metrics in suburban water, coverage ratio, we're down just a little bit from the full year budget, 205 to 206. We're above the 1.20 target. We think that, well, based on the forecast, we said we were going to finish at budget. Year-to-date operating ratio, down a little bit compared to the full year target. Better than 1. We seek to hit 1, and we think we'll be all right with respect to budget at the end of the year. Base cash on hand, we're 262, which is better than our target of 180. And actually, we think we'll finish the year a little bit better. On the wastewater side, year-to-date income, unfavorable by $135,000. We had a positive variance on the operating revenue, so that was good to see. The operating expenses were unfavorable by $189,000. Most of that is in higher treatment and transportation volumes. Again, on the non-operating side, that's pretty much driven by higher interest income, and interest expenses were a little bit unfavorable by $115,000. So altogether, $135,000 unfavorable variance on income. Nothing on the full year. Year to date, cash flows, suburban wastewater, we're $297,000 favorable. Cash from operations down, debt service down a little bit, but we're making it up in lower. Now we're lower than forecasted CapEx and higher interest income. And the $4.1 million is what we talked about on the cash flows full year. That's the borrowing difference. Metrics. Better in coverage ratio. We think we're certainly better than the 1.20 and we'll be around budget for the year. Operating ratio, we budgeted it less than 1. We're hanging around less than 1, close to what we said we had in budget. But it's obviously that we're gonna finish the year at 0.92, and then days cash on hand at like almost 389 versus 180. And we should be better by the end of the year. City division income year to date, $2.7 million better. Most of that, well, a lot of that is in operating revenue. A lot of that is in the non-operating side with interest income, operating expenses down a little bit or higher than a little bit. And we're saving some money on the interest expense side as well. Full year, no variance. Year to date cash flows, $2.1 million better. Cash from operations is up. We're getting some additional help from better debt service. CapEx is kind of right at forecast, only slightly unfavorable. And again, higher interest income. No change in the city for full year so far. Debt service coverage, better than target, better than budget. Year-to-date operating ratio, better than target, better than budget. And we're at 405 days cash on hand, which is obviously nice compared to target.
Question. They're referring to higher than expected interest earnings.
Yes.
Why?
We have kind of forecasted what we thought we were going to see in terms of budget, and we're starting to see better. We're still seeing better interest rates on some of the investment activity that we had. And actually, to be honest with you, I'm parking a lot more in investment funds than I had with respect to idle cash. So.
Thank you.
So this is the scorecard. You can see we're not bad with suburban water being at 9. Suburban wastewater, I would ordinarily say I might be concerned about this if we were talking about in September. We're talking about at the end of March. And to be honest with you, it's either yellow or green. There's a couple of them that are really close that I would say is yellow. So I haven't gotten any alarm buzzers going off in my mind on suburban wastewater, and cities at 13. Can say that we'll take a pretty good look at all of them in terms of forecasts for Q2, and we'll spend a lot of time looking at what's going on in suburban wastewater. We kind of touched on some of these. Net income was favorable on all 3 funds. That's good. Actually, suburban water was the only one that had a favorable cash flow. Year-to-date net income is favorable for suburban water and city. Wastewater is down a bit. Same thing on the cash flow side. So next is a Q2 forecast. We'll try to take a look at what's going on with operating expenses. We'll take a look at quick look at CapEx spending, and this would be the first reporting quarter that I expect to see some changes with respect to budget now. And I'm kind of leaning more toward the favorable side. So.
Thank you, Ed. Any questions?
I have one last question, and I really can't. You mentioned you've invested more in interest earning assets as opposed to idle cash. What is idle cash and where is it?
So idle cash would be what I consider above and beyond the 180 days, and we do have some balances.
You say it's idle, what does that mean?
Well, essentially, we don't need it at the very moment.
So where is it?
So it's sitting in a cash account and it's only getting a real nominal interest rate. And the only way that I could get it out of there is to actually take that out and invest it in some funds.
Yeah.
And that'll get a higher interest rate. I've done some of that, I haven't done all of them.
How much money is that we're talking about?
Well, we're probably talking about a couple $1 million that we could do some further investing on. Because you see some of the cash, look, the base cash on hand. When you're getting into 400, but it's probably time to invest some. And I have looked at the city side and had discussions with M&T about making sure that we get some return on some of that.
Discussions with the bank?
Yeah. Yeah, we have with the indenture agreement, they'll take some of our idle cash and put it into investments that we select.
Who's that? Who they?
M&T Bank.
Oh, M&T Bank, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
I'm sorry, yeah. M&T Bank is our trustee there.
Okay.
So they'll work with me in terms of where that goes. Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Does it go into CDs then, or what sort of?
Mostly CDs, but there's some other investments that are allowed under the Municipal Authorities Act that are not just plain like 3.5% CDs. So, but we stay out of anything risky. Don't like risk.
Can M&T spread it around at the $250,000 per, reimbursable, if, your insurance level?
They will actually spread it around in whatever manner that we prefer them to. I mean, they pretty much take direction from us. It's just that I've spent a little bit more time looking at where that needs to go, and but they will give me advice on good opportunities.
Yeah, but yeah, for, to keep that $250,000 of insurance that's potential from the federal government, you gotta spread it around to
That is
various
correct.
banks. And
Yeah.
so they as a bank can do that with other banks.
Yes, they can.
Okay.
Yes. Question?
Anything else? All right, thank you, Ed. So moving on. While the monthly financial report is probably our most important report, the systems operation is my personal favorite, so turn it over to you, Andrew.
Thanks. Like to hear that, Jack. So in front of you, we do have the March 2025 report. Happy to report for the safety portion, there is nothing to report. All right, moving on to page 2, between my allergies and the lighting in this room, if I misread any of these numbers, excuse me. But the water production for Allentown was an average of 22.6 MGD for Allentown, and the CLD was 11.16. That is typically what we see right around this time, so we're not really veering off of any of the norms. Going down to wastewater, you will notice that Klein's Island reported 30.45 million gallons per day. In 2025, as a total average, we've been at 30.6, which is much lower, even if you look back at the presentation that we had earlier today. Typically, we see around 33, 34 MGD, and we're just not seeing it this year, and that's mainly due to the amount of precipitation that we've had. However, we did receive 3.68 inches of rain in March. So as far as like the drought goes, we're getting into a better place, but we're still not quite there. However, we're also not seeing as much I&I, which is great news. Moving down to SSOs, there was one in the city. That was on the intersection of 12th Street and Sumner Avenue. And once again, that was due to a blockage of grease and rags. We'll move on to the second portion of the operations. And as I mentioned, there was one SSO in Allentown. Pretty clean slate until we get down to Sand Spring. There was 4 exceedances at the facility this month. Still much better than we saw last year. There was 2 fecal coliform exceedances. One of these past meetings we talked about having the greater than symbol, and then you sort of get knocked with 2 exceedances. That's what happened there. We're still dealing with some issues with higher flows. And when we get the higher flows, some of the solids wash out, goes through the UV system, dirties it up, and we just don't get as good inactivation. That's what happened there. And then the other two was one was a total phosphorus load exceedance, and the second one was a zinc exceedance. We actually have a chemical that we use there from one of our providers for zinc removal. It also removes phosphorus. Something went wonky with the dosages, so we've resolved that issue and do not expect to see that again. Having the zinc exceedance was actually, I think, one of the first times that we've experienced there at that facility. Since we've installed that, we've really not have any issues, so don't really have an explanation of why we needed to increase our dosage, but here we are. And the last one was a boil water advisory that was noted on the second page there as well. But that was at Madison Park. That was sort of an odd one. The PLC faulted and just shut down the station. So there was no booster pumps running, well pumps weren't running, the system lost pressure. By the time we got the alarm here was about a half an hour after the PLC faulted. When our crews went out, they were able to address the issue, get the booster pumps back up running on manual, and reissue the pressure in the system. So boil water advisory was issued for that instance. To correct that issue, we did install a pressure switch. So if that were to ever happen again, the pump would still kick on because it's wired directly into that pressure switch. That's honestly something we should have had before. It was just overlooked. And we looked at every single one of our other systems, and now there's pressure switches involved at all the stations. So something like that should not occur in any of the stations. We also did have that PLC sent out to Schneider to evaluate to see why it faulted. And they couldn't really give us any concrete information of why it faulted. But that's not something that we would normally see. Other than that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions?
I do have one that's completely random. Where do we stand on fluoride?
Where do we stand on fluoride? We fluorinate our water in Allentown. That is by a city ordinance with the Health Bureau, if I remember correctly. So we are required to maintain a 0.5 milligram per liter concentration throughout the city. With that being said, since we do purchase around 7 MGD in the central Lehigh division, that water is also being mixed with the well production. So the only two systems that have fluoride in the water would be the Allentown and the central Lehigh division that we operate.
Just a clarification on that, we also buy fluoridated water from NBMA
Good
for
call.
our North Whitehall customers.
Did I answer your question?
It does, thank you. I'm intrigued by, things that just come out of the air and what the hell's happening?
It's an exciting time.
Just one question, just for refresh my memory. So Sand Spring was chronic ammonia violations, and those have since seemed to be
Yeah, that's a good question.
corrected?
So yes and no.
Weather helped?
The weather over the winter time, ammonia removal has been the best that we've seen since the plant has been installed. Now May is when our permit limits switch over to our lower
Okay.
ammonia limits. So we'll see what happens, but we're right there on the edge. Hoping that we're going to be good. I definitely cannot make any promises, but as far as do I feel more comfortable today than I did last year?
Mhm.
Without a doubt.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So moving on, staff comments,
I have nothing additional.
any solicitor comments,
No comments, thank you.
public comments or other comments?
Hi there. I just want to thank the city and the Office of Compliance appreciate the gymnastics that LCA is having to go through to assure accessibility to Penvest funding. We just want to thank you again for all the work y'all are doing. Ed, we appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Board member comments. None. No executive session needed for today. So need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Oh, you don't? I don't know. So some meetings I go to, you need a motion to adjourn, so I'm used to hearing that.
You call it, Jeff.
Okay, all right. Meeting adjourned.
Hearing no objections.